one wrong step by the river, and the cowboy realized he was the intruder. Wild West story. Jake Brennan's boot hit the muddy riverbank wrong, and he knew it the second his heel sank into the soft earth. The ground gave way beneath him, not like regular mud, but like something had been disturbed recently, deliberately loosened. His horse whinnied behind him, jerking its head back toward the canyon trail they'd just ascended. Jake pulled his foot free and heard the unmistakable sound of a rifle bolt sliding into place somewhere in the cottonwoods above him. He froze. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the river, and in those shadows he counted 3 distinct silhouettes, maybe 4. His hand drifted toward his holster, but a voice cut through the air before his fingers reached leather. "I wouldn't." The voice belonged to a woman, which surprised him. "You're standing on claimed ground, cowboy." Jake raised his hands slowly, keeping them visible. Didn't see any markers. Just following the river north to Silver Ridge. "Then you should have stayed on the other side." A man's voice this time, rough and aged. "This is Kerrigan territory. Has been for 6 months. 6 months." Jake had been through this valley 8 months ago, driving cattle to the northern markets. Back then it had been open range, free passage for anyone. Things changed fast in the territories, but this felt different. The tension in the air wasn't about property disputes or grazing rights. This was something else. He took a careful step backward, and that's when he saw it. Partially hidden by river grass and willow branches, a wooden crate sat half submerged in the shallows. Then, another, 10 feet upstream. The wood was fresh, the metal bindings new and uncorroded. Whatever the Kerrigans were moving through here, they were moving it regularly. "I'm just passing through," Jake said, keeping his voice steady. "No trouble intended." The woman emerged first from the trees, rifle trained on his chest. She was younger than her voice suggested, maybe 30, with dark hair tied back and eyes that had seen hard years. Behind her came 2 men, both armed, both watching him with the kind of alertness that came from expecting violence. "Name's Lucy Kerrigan," the woman said. "And passing through stopped being an option the moment you saw those crates." Jake's mind raced. The crates were too small for weapons, too carefully placed to be simple supplies. Medicine, maybe? Or gold dust? Something valuable enough to guard with rifles and claim jumpers. "Look, I don't care what you're hauling," Jake said. "I've got business in Silver Ridge, and this is the fastest route. Let me water my horse, and I'll be gone within the hour." "Can't do that." The older man stepped forward, his weathered face set in a permanent scowl. "You'll ride back the way you came, take the long route through Badger Pass. 3 extra days, but you'll live to see Silver Ridge?" 3 extra days meant missing the auction. Jake had spent 2 months tracking down the Morgan Ranch property deed, and the bank was selling it off in 4 days. Miss that sale, and everything he'd worked for would disappear. "I can't take Badger Pass," Jake said. "I've got a deadline." Lucy Kerrigan's expression didn't change. "Then you've got a problem." The sun dropped lower, painting the river canyon in shades of orange and red. Jake's horse stamped nervously behind him, sensing the tension. He needed to make a decision, and he needed to make it fast. The Kerrigans weren't going to let him through, and turning back meant losing everything. "What if I helped you?" The words came out before Jake fully thought them through. "Whatever you're moving, you're doing it careful. That means you're worried about someone. Law, maybe. Or competitors. I can scout ahead, make sure your route is clear." Lucy exchanged glances with the older man. Something unspoken passed between them, some calculation of risk and benefit. Finally, she lowered her rifle slightly. "You don't know what you're offering." "I know I need to get through this valley," Jake said. "And I know you need something, or you wouldn't be holding me at gunpoint. So let's deal." The older man spat into the dirt. "He's a liability, Lucy. Let me handle it." "No." Lucy's voice carried authority. "We're already short-handed since Danny got arrested in Prescott. If he scouts ahead and keeps quiet, he's worth more alive than dead." Jake felt ice in his veins at how casually she discussed killing him, but he kept his expression neutral. "What am I scouting for?" "Federal marshals," Lucy said. "They've been patrolling the upper valley for 2 weeks. We need to know their patterns, their camp locations, their numbers. You do that, you can ride through. You breathe a word to anyone, and we'll find you. We've got friends in every town between here and the Canadian border." Jake nodded slowly. "When do I start?" "Now." Lucy gestured toward the canyon. "There's a marshal camp somewhere between here and Crystal Creek. Find it, map it, report back by dawn. Do that, and we'll talk about letting you through." The older man handed Jake a small brass telescope. "Don't get caught. Marshals find you spying, they'll hang you same as us." Jake took the telescope and mounted his horse, his mind already working through the complications. He'd just agreed to scout for people running contraband, which made him an accomplice. But turning back meant losing the Morgan Ranch, losing the future he'd planned. Sometimes the wrong choice was the only choice available. He rode north along the river as the sun disappeared behind the canyon walls, leaving him in shadow. Somewhere ahead, federal marshals were hunting the Kerrigans, and Jake had just put himself directly between the hunters and the hunted. The river bent eastward after 2 miles, and Jake followed it into narrower canyon passages where the cottonwoods grew thick and the water ran fast over smooth stones. He kept his horse at a careful walk, listening for sounds that didn't belong. Marshals traveled in groups of 4 to 6 usually, and they weren't subtle about their presence. They wanted outlaws to know they were being hunted. But tonight, the canyon was quiet. Too quiet. Jake dismounted near a cluster of boulders and climbed higher for a better vantage point. Through the telescope, he scanned the ridgelines and valleys ahead. Nothing moved except wind through the grass. The marshals were either very good at hiding, or they weren't where Lucy thought they'd be. He was about to descend when he caught movement near Crystal Creek, 3 miles north. Not marshals, something else. A group of riders moving fast through the twilight, at least 8 of them, heading straight for the river where he'd met the Kerrigans. Jake's stomach dropped. These weren't lawmen. They moved wrong, spread out wrong, carried themselves like men hunting rather than patrolling. Someone else knew about the Kerrigans' operation, and they were coming to take it. He had 2 choices. Ride back and warn Lucy, making himself fully complicit in whatever illegal operation they were running. Or stay hidden and let events unfold without him, knowing people would probably die. Jake descended the rocks and mounted his horse. He'd made his deal, and a man kept his word even when that word led him into darkness. He turned south and rode hard towards the Kerrigan camp, knowing that with every hoofbeat he was crossing a line he could never uncross. The night grew cold as he rode, and behind him he heard the distant thunder of approaching horses. Whatever was coming, it was coming fast. Jake reached the Kerrigan camp just as full darkness settled over the canyon. He'd pushed his horse hard, and the animal was lathered and breathing heavy. Lucy emerged from behind a makeshift windbreak, rifle already in hand, her eyes sharp with suspicion. "You're back early," she said. "That's either very good or very bad." "Bad." Jake dismounted quickly. "There's a group riding this way." "Fucking more. They're not marshals. They're moving like raiders, and they're headed straight for this position." The older man, who Jake had learned was Lucy's Uncle Gordon, appeared from the shadows. "How far out?" 30 minutes, maybe less. They were pushing hard when I spotted them near Crystal Creek." Lucy's jaw tightened. She turned to Gordon. "Wake the others. Get the crates moved to the secondary cache. Now." Gordon disappeared into the cottonwoods, and within seconds Jake heard movement all around him. The Kerrigans had more people than he'd realized, at least 6 others who emerged from concealed positions. They moved with practiced efficiency, loading the riverside crates onto pack mules and leading them upstream toward a narrow side canyon. "You got a name for these raiders?" Lucy asked Jake while watching her people work. "Never seen them before, but they knew where to look." Someone talked. "Danny?" Lucy's voice carried cold fury. "Federal marshals arrested him in Prescott 2 weeks ago. Must have made a deal, told them about our operation. But these aren't lawmen coming for us." Jake understood. The marshals sold the information. "Probably to rivals who want your route." "The Bannister gang," Gordon returned, checking his rifle. "Has to be. They've been trying to muscle into medicine running for months. If Danny told the marshals about our river route and the marshals told Bannister, we're looking at a wipeout." That explained the careful security, the armed guards, the federal interest. The Kerrigans were smuggling medical supplies to settlements the government had embargoed, probably Indian territories or mining camps with unpaid taxes. Legal gray area, but profitable enough to kill for. Lucy grabbed Jake's arm. "You can still ride out, head upstream with the mules." "You've done what we asked." Jake looked at the river, then at the southern approach where Bannister's men would appear. 6 defenders against 8 attackers, maybe more. Poor odds. But he'd taken the Kerrigans' telescope, ridden their scout mission, and warned them of danger. He was already involved, whether he wanted to be or not. "I'm a decent shot," Jake said. "You need every gun you can get," Gordon snorted. Conscience or stupidity? Probably both. Jake checked his pistol, then reached for the rifle scabbard on his saddle. "Where do you want me?" Lucy studied him for a long moment, weighing trust against necessity. Finally, she pointed to a rocky outcrop overlooking the river approach. "High ground, eastern flank. Anyone comes through, you give us warning shots. Don't engage directly unless they break through. Jake took position as the last of the supply mules disappeared into the side canyon. The Kerrigans spread out in a defensive semicircle, using the natural terrain for cover. Lucy positioned herself behind a fallen cottonwood. Gordon took the western approach, and the others filled in the gaps. The waiting was worse than the riding. Jake's heart hammered against his ribs as minutes stretched like hours. Then he heard them. Hooves on stone, the creak of leather, the low murmur of men coordinating an attack. They came from the south, just as Jake had predicted. But they didn't charge blindly. The riders split into two groups, one along the river, one cutting through the higher ground. They knew the terrain, which meant they'd been watching the Kerrigans for longer than anyone realized. The first shot came from Gordon's position, a sharp crack that echoed through the canyon. A rider screamed and fell from his horse. Then everything exploded into chaos. Gunfire erupted from both sides. Jake aimed carefully at a rider trying to flank Lucy's position and squeezed the trigger. The man jerked sideways in his saddle but stayed mounted, returning fire toward the rocks. Bullets whined off stone around Jake's head, forcing him down. Below, the Kerrigans fought with desperate efficiency. They weren't random outlaws but coordinated defenders protecting something they believed in. Lucy moved between positions with tactical precision, directing fire and covering her people's reloads. Gordon's rifle barked steadily, each shot calculated. But Bannister's men kept coming. They'd brought more than 8 riders. Jake counted at least 12 now, maybe 15. They'd laid a trap within a trap, holding back reserves until the Kerrigans were fully engaged. A rider broke through on the eastern flank, heading straight for the side canyon where the mules had gone. Jake didn't think, just acted. He stood fully exposed on the outcrop and fired 3 rapid shots. The first missed. The second hit the horse, sending it crashing down. The third caught the rider as he rolled clear. The move saved the supplies, but exposed Jake completely. Return fire came immediately. He felt something hot tear through his left shoulder, spinning him backward. He hit the rocks hard, his rifle clattering away. The pain and the ringing in his ears, Jake heard Lucy shouting orders. The Kerrigans were falling back toward the side canyon, a fighting retreat. Gordon provided covering fire while others pulled the wounded. It was a good plan, a smart plan. But Jake was cut off. He was too far east, too exposed and losing blood fast. He tried to stand and his legs wouldn't cooperate properly. The shoulder wound was bad, maybe worse than bad. A shadow fell across him. Jake looked up expecting to see one of Bannister's men, but instead found Lucy crouching beside him, her face streaked with powder smoke and blood. "Can you ride?" she asked. "Don't think so. Then you're going to have to try anyway." She pulled him upright with surprising strength, ignoring his gasp of pain. "Because I don't leave people behind, and you just saved our entire supply run." She half-carried, half-dragged him down from the outcrop. Bullets kicked up dirt around them, but somehow they made it to cover.
Gordon appeared with 2 horses, his own face grin.
"They're regrouping for another push," Gordon said. "We need to move, now." Lucy got Jake onto a horse, tying him into the saddle so he wouldn't fall. The world tilted dangerously, but he held on. The Kerrigans mounted up and rode hard into the side canyon, leaving Bannister's men to claim empty camps and abandoned positions. They rode through the night, following paths only the Kerrigans knew. Jake faded in and out of consciousness, held upright by leather straps and Lucy's occasional steadying hand. Sometime before dawn, they reached a hidden valley with a cabin and a small barn. Inside, Lucy worked on his shoulder by lamplight. The bullet had passed through clean, which was lucky. She cleaned and bandaged the wound with supplies from the salvaged crates, proper medical supplies that Jake recognized from his time in the army. "You're running medicine to the Chiricahua Apache," Jake said when he could speak clearly again. "The government cut off their supplies when they refused the new reservation boundaries." Lucy didn't deny it. "Children die without medicine."
Old people die. We're not heroes.
"We charge for the service, but we make sure it gets through. And Bannister wants the route because medicine means steady money. That's the world we live in." Lucy finished the bandaging. "You did good tonight. Saved lives, including your own. But now you've got a choice to make." Jake knew what she meant. Ride away or ride with you. If you ride away, Bannister will hear about the cowboy who fought at the river. They'll come looking. If you ride with us, you're protected, but you're also committed. This isn't a one-time deal. Gordon stood in the doorway, his face unreadable. "The boy's got sand, Lucy, but can we trust him?" "He took a bullet for supplies he doesn't profit from," Lucy said. "That's enough for me." Jake thought about the Morgan Ranch, the auction, the life he'd planned. All of it seemed distant now, like something from another man's dream. He'd come to the river looking for a shortcut and found something else entirely. A cause that mattered. People who fought for something beyond themselves. "I'll need to send a wire to Silver Ridge," Jake said. "Tell the bank I'm withdrawing my bid." Lucy smiled, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her. "We've got a telegraph operator in our network. Consider it done." As dawn broke over the hidden valley, Jake realized he'd crossed more than just a river. He'd crossed into a new life, one where right and wrong weren't determined by laws written far away, but by the choices made in moments of crisis. He'd become the intruder in his own plans, and somehow that felt exactly right. The weeks that followed transformed Jake from an accidental ally into a full member of the Kerrigan operation. Lucy taught him the routes, the contacts, the careful dance of avoiding federal patrols while delivering medicine to settlements the government preferred to forget. His shoulder healed slowly, leaving a scar that ached when storms approached. They operated out of 3 camps scattered across the territory, moving supplies in carefully timed runs that avoided pattern and prediction. Jake learned that the Kerrigans weren't just a family operation, but part of a larger network of smugglers, traders, and sympathizers who believed the government's embargo policies were morally wrong. The Army signed treaties, then broke them, Gordon explained one evening while they sorted supplies in the main warehouse. A hidden cave system near the Mogollon Rim pushed the Chiricahua onto land that couldn't support them, then cut off trade. Disease spreads in those conditions. We're not political revolutionaries. We're just filling a gap that shouldn't exist. Jake packed laudanum bottles carefully into padded crates. "But Bannister and his gang, they're just in it for the money. That's the difference," Lucy said, entering with a telegraph message. "They see a market opportunity. We see dying children. Both get medicine where it's needed, but motivation matters." She handed Jake the paper. "Oh, we've got a problem." The message was from their contact in Prescott. Federal marshals had expanded their operations, doubling patrols along the traditional routes. Worse, Bannister's gang had started attacking other smuggling operations, trying to eliminate competition. "They hit the Morrison crew last night," Lucy continued. "Killed 2 runners, stole their entire supply cache. The marshals arrested the survivors, probably got more information about routes and timing." Gordon swore quietly. "We're being squeezed from both sides. Law from above, outlaws from below." "We need a new approach," Jake said. "Something neither the marshals nor Bannister will expect." Lucy looked at him with interest. "What are you thinking?" "We go bigger. Instead of small, frequent runs, we do one major delivery. Gather 3 months of supplies, move everything at once through an entirely new route. The marshals are watching the valleys and river canyons." "What about the high country? The Tonto Rim Trail?" Gordon shook his head. "That's 60 miles of exposed terrain. If we get caught up there, there's no escape."
"Exactly why they won't expect it," Jake said.
"Everyone knows it's suicide, so they're not watching it." Lucy studied the territory map pinned to the cave wall. "It would take us through Payson, then across the rim to the White Mountain settlements. 5 days of hard riding, maybe 6. We'd need to cache supplies along the route, have fresh horses waiting." "And if we're wrong?" Gordon asked. "If the marshals have scouts on the rim, then we're finished," Lucy said simply. "But if we keep running the old routes, we're finished anyway. Bannister will keep hitting us, the marshals will keep closing in. At least this way we're making the choice instead of reacting." They spent the next 2 weeks preparing. Jake rode the rim trail twice, scouting terrain and identifying defensive positions. They recruited additional riders from sympathetic ranchers and townspeople who believed in the cause. Supplies were gathered slowly to avoid attracting attention, filtered through legitimate business fronts. The operation required 40 horses, 16 riders, and careful timing. They would leave on a moonless night, move through the high country while the valley patrols focused below, and reach the Apache settlements before anyone realized the volume of supplies moving through the territory. 3 days before departure, everything fell apart. A rider arrived at dawn, his horse nearly dead from exhaustion. "Bannister knows," the man gasped, falling from his saddle. "He's got someone inside your network. He's planning to hit you on the rim trail." Lucy grabbed the man's shirt. "Who's the informant?" "Don't know. Just heard Bannister talking to his lieutenant. They know the route, the timing, everything." Jake felt cold spread through his chest. Someone they trusted had betrayed them. He looked around at the assembled riders, seeing familiar faces suddenly transformed into potential threats. Gordon checked his rifle methodically. Lucy's expression hardened into something dangerous. "We've got 2 options," Lucy said quietly. "Cancel the run and scatter, or spring our own trap." "How?" Gordon demanded. We don't know who's feeding information to Bannister. No, Jake said slowly, an idea forming. But we can control what information gets fed. Let the traitor think we're keeping the original plan. Meanwhile, we actually leave a day early and take a different route. Lucy nodded, understanding immediately. We split the group. Half follow the original plan as decoys moving with empty crates. The other half take the real supplies on an alternate route. Bannister hits the decoys, thinks he's won, and we slip through while he's celebrating. That puts the decoy team in serious danger, Gordon pointed out. It does, Lucy agreed. So we make sure they're prepared for it. Light loads, fast horses, and clear escape routes. Their job isn't to fight, just to draw attention and survive. They worked through the night reorganizing the operation. Jake volunteered for the decoy team, but Lucy refused. You know the alternate routes better than anyone, she said. You're riding with the real convoy. The decoy team left first, following the original rim trail plan exactly as discussed in their previous meetings. The real convoy waited 6 hours, then departed on a southern route that would swing wide through rougher terrain before cutting north to the settlements. Jake rode with Lucy at the head of the convoy, 8 riders moving carefully through juniper forests and red rock canyons. They traveled in silence, communicating with hand signals, every sense alert for ambush. On the second day, they heard gunfire to the north. The decoys had encountered Bannister's gang. Jake wanted to turn back and help, but Lucy kept them moving forward. That's what they signed up for, she said grimly. Best way to honor their sacrifice is to complete the mission. They rode harder, pushing the horses to their limits. The gunfire faded behind them. Jake forced himself not to imagine what was happening to the decoy team, forced himself to focus on the trail ahead. On the fourth morning, they reached the first Apache settlement. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Families emerged from wiki-ups. Elderly leaders greeted them with solemn dignity. Children watched with enormous eyes. The medicine was unloaded and distributed by the settlement's healers, each crate received with the reverence of life-saving gifts. An old Apache woman approached Jake, touching his shoulder where he'd been shot. She spoke in her language, and Lucy translated. She says, "The scar shows you understand the cost of helping others. She thanks you for your blood." Jake felt something break open in his chest, some long-held barrier between who he'd been and who he was becoming. He'd come west chasing land and wealth, measuring success in acres and dollars. But this moment, watching medicine reach people who desperately needed it, felt more valuable than any ranch deed. They spent 2 days at the settlements, distributing supplies and gathering information about federal troop movements. The Apache scouts reported that Bannister's gang had indeed ambushed the decoy team on the rim trail, but the decoys had scattered and escaped with only minor casualties. More importantly, the Federals had arrested several of Bannister's men in the aftermath, believing they'd caught smugglers red-handed. "Bannister's operation is crippled," Lucy said as they prepared to depart, "and the marshals think they won. That buys us time." "But not much," Gordon added. "Someone still betrayed us. They're still out there." The return journey took them through different territory entirely, following ancient trails known only to the Apache. They reached the main camp after 8 days of continuous travel, exhausted but successful. The decoy team was already there, battered but alive. They'd led Bannister's gang on a running fight across the rim, finally escaping by abandoning horses and going on foot through terrain only locals knew. The empty crates Bannister had captured contained nothing but rocks and sand, but the victory felt hollow. Somewhere in their network, a traitor still operated. Until they identified the leak, every future run would be compromised. Jake spent the next week quietly investigating, talking to riders, checking backgrounds, following money trails. Lucy did the same. They compared notes carefully, eliminating suspects one by one. The answer came from an unexpected source. One of the younger riders, a boy named Pete, approached Jake nervously one evening. "I saw something," Pete said. "Didn't think much of it at the time, but now it bothers me. 3 weeks ago, Calvin went to Prescott for supplies. Said he'd be gone 2 days. But I was in Payson doing a pickup, and I saw him there on the 3rd day. He lied about where he was going." Calvin, one of Gordon's oldest friends, riding with the Kerrigans for over a year. Jake felt sick, but the pieces fit. Calvin had access to all their planning sessions, knew every route and contact. He'd been in position to pass information to both the Marshals and Bannister's gang. Jake brought the information to Lucy. Her face went white, then red with controlled fury. "Gordon trusted him," she said. "This will destroy him." "But we have to deal with it," Jake said, "before Calvin causes more damage." They confronted Calvin that night with Gordon present. The man denied everything at first, then gradually broke down as evidence mounted. He'd been gambling, accumulated debts in Prescott, Bannister had offered to clear the debts in exchange for information. Then the marshals had caught him passing information and threatened arrest unless he became their informant too.
I never meant for anyone to die, Calvin said miserably. I just needed money. Then I was in too deep to get out. Gordon stood silent throughout the confession, his face carved from stone. When Calvin finished, Gordon spoke quietly. You betrayed family for money. That's unforgivable. But you're still breathing because Lucy doesn't want more blood on her hands.
He stepped closer to Calvin. You've got 1 hour to pack and ride out. If I ever see you again, I'll kill you.
If you talk to anyone about our operations, I'll find you. Understand? Calvin nodded frantically and fled.
They watched him ride away into the darkness, carrying his betrayal into exile. I'm sorry, Gordon, Lucy said softly.
Don't be. I should have seen the signs.
Gordon looked older suddenly, weighed down by disappointment. But we've got bigger problems. With Calvin gone, Bannister knows we've identified the leak.
He'll assume we're changing everything. We need to stay ahead of him. Jake had been thinking about this exact problem. What if we don't just change our operations? What if we change the entire game? Lucy and Gordon both looked at him with interest.
The problem isn't just Bannister or the marshals, Jake continued. It's that the embargo exists at all. What if we went public? Told newspapers about the conditions in the settlements, the children dying from preventable diseases, the government breaking its own treaties. That's dangerous, Lucy said.
It exposes everyone involved. It's already dangerous, Jake countered. At least this way we're fighting for something bigger than just staying ahead of the law.
We make the embargo politically unpopular, force the government to justify why they're denying medicine to people dying from cholera and pneumonia. Gordon considered this carefully. It would take careful handling.
We'd need sympathetic journalists, documentation of conditions, testimony from the settlements, and we'd be painting targets on our backs.
The targets are already there, Jake said. This just gives us a chance to win instead of just surviving. After a long silence, she turned back. My grandfather started this operation because he believed some laws were worth breaking.
He said history judges people not by whether they obeyed authority, but by whether they did what was right when it mattered.
She looked at Jake.
You came here by accident, took a wrong step by a river, but maybe that accident was supposed to happen.
Maybe you're here to help us finish what we started. Over the following months, they built a case that couldn't be ignored.
Jake used his connections from his previous life to reach journalists in San Francisco and Denver. Lucy gathered testimony from Apache elders and frontier doctors. Gordon documented supply manifests showing exactly what medicines were being denied and why they were needed. The story broke in September, spreading from Western newspapers to national publications. Government embargo kills innocents, read one headline. Medicine smugglers are heroes, asked another. Photographs of sick children in the settlements appeared alongside accounts of treaty violations and bureaucratic cruelty. The public response was immediate and overwhelming. Churches organized donation drives. Politicians faced uncomfortable questions about enforcement priorities. The embargo, designed to punish defiant Apache leaders, became politically toxic as citizens realized it primarily harmed women, children, and the elderly. Federal authorities responded by intensifying enforcement, but now every arrest generated newspaper coverage and public sympathy. The Kerrigans became folk heroes, modern Robin Hoods defying unjust laws. Support networks expanded across the territory. What had been a desperate smuggling operation transformed into a political movement. Bannister's gang, caught between increased law enforcement and public disapproval, quietly disbanded. Some members were arrested, others drifted away. The leader himself fled to Mexico, his reputation ruined. By winter, the embargo was officially lifted. The government framed it as a humanitarian gesture, claiming they'd always intended to provide medicine once security conditions improved. Nobody believed the official story, but the result was the same. Legal supply routes opened and medicine reached the settlements without subterfuge. The Kerrigans gathered one last time in the hidden valley, surrounded by empty crates and memories of desperate rides through hostile territory. They'd won, but victory felt strange after months of constant danger.
What happens now? Pete asked. Do we just go back to normal life?
There is no normal after this, Lucy said. We've seen what's possible when people refuse to accept injustice. That doesn't stop just because we won one fight. Jake understood what she meant. The Kerrigan network hadn't dissolved but evolved, shifting focus to other frontier injustices. They provided supplies to mining camps suffering under company store monopolies, helped settlers facing unfair land seizures, supported communities the government preferred to forget. As for Jake, the Morgan Ranch deed he'd once pursued seemed like ancient history. He'd found something more valuable than property, a purpose that gave his life meaning beyond personal gain. He stayed with the Kerrigans, not as a temporary ally, but as permanent family. Years later, when journalists asked about the legendary medicine smugglers of the 1880s, most focused on Lucy Kerrigan's leadership or Gordon's tactical brilliance. But those who knew the full story understood that sometimes history turns on accidents, on wrong steps taken by rivers that lead to exactly where someone needs to be. Jake Brennan had come to that river looking for a shortcut to a land auction. He'd left as something else entirely, an intruder in his own planned future who discovered that the best life was the one he never intended to live. The scar on his shoulder ached when storms approached, a permanent reminder that some wounds marked the beginning of healing rather than the end of wholeness. The river still flowed through that canyon, indifferent to the history made along its banks. But the people who lived in the surrounding settlements remembered. They remembered the riders who came in darkness, bringing medicine and hope. They remembered that laws could be challenged, that justice sometimes required breaking rules, and that ordinary people could change the world when they refused to look away from suffering. Jake stood by that same river on a spring morning, 15 years after his wrong step on the muddy bank. Lucy stood beside him, older now but still carrying the intensity that had defined their early days. The operation had ended, but their work continued in different forms. "Do you ever regret it?" Lucy asked. "You gave up everything you'd planned for this life." Jake watched the water flow past, remembering the man he'd been that day, desperate to reach a land auction, believing wealth and property defined success. That man seemed like a stranger now. "I regret nothing," he said simply. "That wrong step was the rightest thing I ever did." Lucy smiled and took his hand. They'd married 5 years ago, a quiet ceremony attended by Apache elders and reformed smugglers, celebrating love born from shared purpose and mutual respect. They ran a legitimate freight business now, using the same routes and contacts to deliver supplies legally, but they'd never forgotten where they came from or what they'd fought for. Behind them, voices called out, their children, 2 boys and a girl, playing along the riverbank under Gordon's watchful eye. The next generation growing up with stories of medicine runs and midnight rides, learning that sometimes the best people were those who knew when to break rules that deserved breaking. Jake squeezed Lucy's hand, feeling the calluses earned through years of hard riding and harder choices. The river flowed on, carrying memories downstream, while new stories began on the same banks where everything had changed with one wrong step into soft mud in a world he never imagined. He'd come to the river as an intruder and left as a revolutionary. But more importantly, he'd learned that accidents and mistakes could transform into destiny, that wrong turns could lead to profound rightness, and that the life worth living was rarely the one originally planned. The sun climbed higher, warming the canyon. Jake and Lucy walked back toward their children, toward the future they'd built from courage and conviction. The river kept flowing, and somewhere in its endless movement, the ghost of that younger man still stood on the muddy bank, about to take the step that would change everything. Some steps sink into soft earth and reveal solid ground beneath. Some intrusions into unknown territory become homecomings, and some cowboys find that the West isn't won through land deeds and personal wealth, but through the harder work of standing for something larger than themselves, even when it costs everything they thought they wanted. The story of the Kerrigans became legend, the kind of story told around campfires and passed down through generations. But Jake knew the truth was simpler and more profound than legend suggested. They'd been ordinary people who made extraordinary choices when circumstances demanded it. They'd been scared and uncertain, making decisions in moments of crisis without knowing if they'd chosen wisely. But they'd chosen with their hearts aligned to justice, their actions guided by compassion, and their courage drawn from the simple refusal to accept that children should die when medicine existed to save them. In the end, that was enough. That was everything. Jake Brennan had taken one wrong step by a river and discovered he was an intruder in his own planned life. The greatest gift of that accident was realizing his plans had been too small, his dreams too limited, his vision too focused on personal gain. The wrong step had led him exactly where he needed to be, among people who taught him that real wealth couldn't be measured in acres or dollars, but in lives touched and justice served. Years later, old and content, Jake would still dream of that moment. The soft mud giving way beneath his boot, the rifle bolt sliding into place, Lucy's voice cutting through the afternoon air. In his dreams, he always made the same choice, took the same path, accepted the same risks. Because that wrong step had been the beginning of everything right in his life, and he'd take it again without hesitation, knowing where it led. The river still flows through that canyon today, carving its path through stone as it has for millennia. The crates are long gone, the camps abandoned, the riders passed into history. But the lesson remains, carved as deeply as water carves rock. Sometimes we have to become intruders in our own stories to discover who we're really meant to be. Sometimes one wrong step is actually the first step on the only path worth walking. And sometimes the greatest adventures begin not with careful planning, but with simple accidents that reveal our truest selves. Jake Brennan took a wrong step by a river, and in that moment of sinking earth and surprised recognition, he found his life's purpose. The rest was just details. The inevitable unfolding of a choice made in crisis and honored through decades of consequence. He'd been an intruder in the valley, an intruder in the Kerrigan operation, an intruder in his own carefully laid plans. But ultimately he'd come home to himself, to the person he'd always been meant to become, waiting patiently on the far side of one wrong step by a river in the wild, untamed West.